So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're doing another case from London, and this one is a super important case. I mean, every single case that I cover is a super important one, but this one especially because it involves knife crime in London, and this is a huge thing that this country is dealing with all over the country, but London primarily is terrible for youth knife crime, and I feel like I should cover it more on my channel. It's something that needs more awareness, it needs more campaigning against, it needs more education. Like, young people need to be hearing these kind of stories so that it puts them off taking a knife out onto the streets, because it's only a growing issue here. So I am going to try and find a couple more cases like this to cover on my channel. If you have any, please leave them down below in the comments. But for today, we're going to be talking about the murder of Champion Ganda. Before we get into it, I do just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible. Without these sponsors, I wouldn't be able to be here on YouTube spreading these cases, getting people educated, spreading awareness. And today's sponsor is the wonderful Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service with over 3,000 titles on a range of different topics, from history, science, space, earth, nature, all the way through to, of course, true crime. Magellan TV honestly has one of the most unique true crime selections I've ever seen. They cover a lot of smaller cases that otherwise I wouldn't have heard of if I didn't have Magellan TV. I feel like a lot of the big streaming services cover a lot of the same cases. They just kind of recycle them, make a more up-to-date documentary on them every few years, but Magellan TV really try and find the cases that no one's really talking about, and they bring them to light. I think they're amazing. One of my recent documentary watches, this is no exaggeration, is my favourite documentary I think I've ever seen. Ever. I'm like telling all my friends about this. It's called Snatches of New York. I had no idea that this was going on. It's about the tissue harvesting business in New York, where people take a dead body and they will harvest the bones and the tissue. Sometimes they skin them and they will sell those parts of this person's dead body without their consent, and then, like, say they sell one of the bones in the body, they will then replace that bone with like a PVC pipe and give the body back to the victim's family so that they can bury them. And the family have no idea that this has happened, that parts of their loved one's body have been harvested and sold. It's such an interesting but also a very heartbreaking concept, but I do really recommend that documentary. It's called Snatches of New York. Magellan TV is completely ad-free, so there's no interruptions as you're watching. You can watch on pretty much any device that you have. They also update their selections weekly, so there's always something new for you to find. You're never going to be bored. And they're very kindly offering you guys a limited time discount of 30% off when you get an annual subscription, so that makes it about $3.50 a month, which is insane. But that's not all. They're also giving you a 2-week free trial to kick that off. All you have to do is sign up using the link below in the description of this video. You don't want to miss it, because honestly, it is one of my favourite things I've ever found in the true crime world. It's such a gift. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Now, before we get into it, I do just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. I just want to give a quick content warning that this case, of course, will be covering knife crime, which I know is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. I think it's important for us to talk about it, but also if that is going to cause you any kind of issues, if you don't feel like you can watch anything related to that right now, please click out of this video and look after yourself. I'm sure I'll see you again in the future with a different video that's maybe a little bit more suitable for you. That being said, let's just get straight into the case. So this takes place in Newham, which is in East London in England, in 2013. On May the 9th, 2013, teachers at Sandringham Primary School in East London were just going about their normal day teaching classes when they heard some commotion on the street outside around 2 p.m. So they ran outside to see what was going on, and that was when they saw 2 young boys laying on the pavement outside of this school, bleeding profusely. They'd collapsed on the ground. So teachers rushed back inside to go and call 999, try and get some ambulances, some police down. They had no idea what had just taken place outside of the school, but they knew it was very serious and they needed emergency care. So ambulances arrived as quickly as they could. They looked at these 2 boys and immediately they knew that this had been some sort of knife attack. it was very clear that the boys had stab wounds pretty much all over their bodies. They quickly assessed both the boys to see what kind of condition they were in, and it was very clear to the paramedics that one boy was in a lot more critical condition than the other. They were both in a really bad state, don't get me wrong. This had been quite a savage attack, whereas one of them was able to kind of be transported to hospital. They could put him on a stretcher, they could move him and get him to hospital for treatment, whereas the other boy was in such a critical condition that they couldn't even try and move him. They needed to try and treat him there on the pavement. So paramedics got all their equipment out and they start seeing to him on the roadside. They're doing absolutely everything they can to try and keep this boy conscious, but they quickly realise that it's just not gonna be enough. And within minutes, this teenage boy was pronounced dead at the scene. He'd been stabbed to death on a residential street right outside a primary school, and no one had seen it happen. So the police were called in and they set to work on what was now a murder inquiry. And the first step in this investigation was to identify this murder victim. They were quickly able to determine that this boy that had lost his life that day was 17-year-old Champion Ganda. Police got in contact with one of his sisters, I believe, was the first person to find out that he was dead, and from there it was just a whirlwind for the Ganda family. It was one of Champion's sisters that called their mother Peggy and informed her that her son was gone. She was in a very frantic state on the phone actually. She was just saying, "Mum, someone stabbed Champion, he's gone, he's dead." And so Peggy rushed to the police station and she was begging the police to just let her be with her son. She said that if he could hear her voice, he might wake up. He wouldn't want her to be sad, and so he would wake up. Obviously, the police couldn't allow that because he was already dead at this point. I think his mother was just, you know, something like that wouldn't set in immediately, would it? I think she probably just thought that maybe by some kind of miracle, if he did hear his mother's voice, that kind of connection could bring him back. Peggy remembers all she wanted to do was just hold his hands and just pray with him and hold him and talk to him. But of course it was sadly too late. At this point, Champion had been gone for about an hour. He died on the roadside. Champion's autopsy showed that he'd actually been stabbed 11 times that day, and they were very severe stab wounds. One of his lungs was punctured. One of the stab wounds was so deep that it had actually chipped his bone, and he lost his life very quickly. I mean, the stabbing happened and within minutes he was pronounced dead. And he was so young as well, just 17 years old. He was born on the 19th of September 1995 and was actually raised in Essex, which is just next to London in South England. He was from a very big family. He was one of 7 siblings, and I think he could have been the oldest or maybe the second oldest. He had a lot of younger brothers and sisters. His mother was actually a single mother, and so Champion did everything he could from a very young age actually to try and help his mother raise his younger siblings. That's one thing you'll see as I'm talking about Champion. He seemed like such a gem, such a wonderful son to his mother. He would do anything and everything to help anyone and everyone. The family did struggle financially quite a bit. I mean, this was a single mother looking after 7 children. Naturally, that is going to put a financial strain on a family when they're all living off one wage. So it was hard for Champion's mum, but she did her absolute best. She made sure that her kids always had the necessities. She gave them everything she could. His mother, Peggy, described Champion as funny, caring. I think he had a real soft spot for his mum, which I absolutely love when teenage boys have that connection with their mum. You know what teenage boys are like? They just rip into each other for everything, and being seen as a mummy's boy is sometimes quite, I don't know, sometimes boys get embarrassed by that, but Champion didn't care. He loved his mum. His mum was like his best friend, and he wasn't afraid to admit that. He always wanted to see her smiling. He always wanted to see Peggy happy. She meant the world to him, and he was going to make sure he could give her whatever could make her happy. Champion was super, super popular. He had so many friends. Everyone knew him and liked him as well. He was a very likable person. And when Champion was about 14 years old in secondary school, he met a beautiful girl named Danielle, and he just fell for this girl. He knew he had to make Danielle his girlfriend. The two of them were together for about 3 years before Champion's death, and Danielle really saw him as her soulmate. She described him as her soulmate. She saw a future with Champion. They were like inseparable. There wasn't one day that went by where they didn't at least try and see each other, but even if they couldn't see each other, they would be texting all day, calling on an evening. Danielle says that even though they were so young, they were together between the ages of 14 and 17, they just felt like they knew they could spend the rest of their lives together. They just knew they were going to get married. They knew they were going to have children. They even discussed children's names. They discussed where they were going to live, how many kids they were going to have. They were going to call it Marley if it was a boy, or Aaliyah if it was a girl. I love like the music theme there. Champion was so into music as well. We'll get onto that in a minute. Champion did well in school. He had decent grades, but he mainly excelled in sport, especially football. So much so, in fact, that he actually wanted to become a professional footballer one day. That was like one of his biggest goals. And it was a dream that was looking very much like it could be a reality for Champion, because he was so talented that he was actually being approached by like big football clubs. I know West Ham in particular showed a lot of interest in Champion, and Arsenal. He trained with Arsenal a few times and they were keeping an eye on him because they wanted to watch his progress. They saw a lot of potential in Champion. Everyone had no doubt in their minds that he could be this big, talented, successful, rich footballer one day. It was just kind of a matter of time until he got to that point. But deep down below the surface, Champion wasn't 100% sure that that was the future he wanted. He always said that he couldn't quite relate to the other football boys. Like, there was something different about Champion. He didn't know if football was completely for him. He kept at it because he knew how much of a promising future he had there, but there was also another career path that was kind of catching his eye, and that was music. Champion and his best friend Shaquille started rapping and making music. Champion went under the stage name Chrome, and he loved it. He found a real passion for that as well. He was so talented. If you get a chance, go and have a look at some YouTube videos of him like freestyling, because the comments, oh my god, I was reading the comments as part of my research and there is so much love for that boy on the internet. It's clear how much of an impact Champion had in such a short time on this kind of underground rap scene in London. Surprisingly enough though, Champion never actually told his mother Peggy that he was making music. She had no idea that any of this was even happening until after his death, when she got to see all the videos of her son. I don't know if this was intentional, if he was intentionally keeping it from his mother, or if it's just one of those things that just doesn't come up in conversation, I don't know. His siblings knew though, especially one of his younger brothers. Champion would always be like writing his lyrics and stuff in his room, and then he'd go into his younger brother and he'd show him them, and his brother would be like, yeah, that's sick. When Champion turned 17 years old, so this is shortly before his death, he decided to move out of the family home in Essex and go and move in with some relatives in Newham in East London. I don't really know what his reason for this move was. I don't know if it was to kind of get closer to the underground rap scene in London because he was making music now more and more and he was really into it. I really don't know his reasonings, but that is what put him in Newham at the time of his murder. And that brings us back to the timeline. Now police are setting about this murder investigation. They needed to find out who killed Champion Ganda. His friend that was injured that day, that was actually Shaquille that I spoke about earlier. Him and his best friend Shaquille started making music together, and it was Shaquille that he was with when he was killed. Shaquille had been transported to hospital, and it was, even though it was very early days, it was looking like he was going to make a full recovery, which was great. But because he was in such a severe condition, police couldn't speak with him for a while. He was going to be in treatment. So they had to try and go about this investigation another way. Even though they had this eyewitness in hospital, he wouldn't be much use for a little while. So police thought the best thing that they could do was talk to everyone at the scene that day. The teachers that ran out and found the boys, they wanted to speak to neighbours, because this was a residential street as well. There were houses everywhere, so they were doing door-to-door inquiries. Because no one had actually seen this altercation take place, A few neighbours did report to police that they heard shouting for about 10 minutes before the teachers ran out and found the boys, so it did seem like this was the result of an argument, maybe. Maybe Champion and Shaquille had an argument with another group of boys, because neighbours did say that they heard a lot of different voices. It wasn't just 3, there was probably about 5, which told police that they were looking for multiple people in relation to this murder, which was a good start. Some neighbours did say that they'd seen a group of 3 boys interacting with Shaquille and Champion before the murder, but they hadn't seen the actual murder take place. They'd seen them shouting at each other. At one point, Champion and Shaquille turned and walked away, so they thought that this argument was over. But quickly, Shaquille turned back around and went back over to this other group of boys that they were arguing with, and about a minute later, Champion turned and followed him back to go and back his best friend, I suppose. His family said that very much sounded like Champion. He was very loyal. He was never going to let his best friend face this alone. He was going to be by his side. But unfortunately, none of these witnesses that did see this group of 3 boys could identify them. They didn't know who they were. All they could really say was that they were 3 black males. And that's all they got on these men. But I suppose at least that gave police that first piece of information that they were looking for 3 men for this murder. That same day, police actually managed to find some CCTV footage from the top of the road. So this didn't actually catch the attack, because the attack happened halfway down the road. But this camera did catch 3 men that they believed to be the 3 attackers jumping out of a taxi at the end of the road and walking down to Sandringham Primary School where this took place. It seemed as though it was quite a spontaneous jump out of the taxi, so police very quickly theorised that maybe these 3 boys had been in this taxi driving down the road, then they saw Shaquille and Champion walking down that road, and so the 3 of them very quickly decided to jump out and go and follow them. So maybe this was some kind of previous beef that these 2 groups had. Maybe these 3 boys saw Shaquille and Champion, recognised them, and wanted to go and start this argument. But what they got from this footage was that this murder probably wasn't pre-planned. It seemed like they just happened to be taking a taxi down that road, and then they spotted the boys and then they pulled it over and jumped out. But unfortunately, this CCTV footage, although it could show us that, it wasn't clear enough to show these boys' faces, so they weren't going to be able to identify anyone from this footage. So police quickly figured that the best way to identify these 3 men was to figure out their motive for killing Champion and seriously injuring Shaquille. If they could find out the motive, then they could probably trace back through people and suspects and then eventually find them that way. Immediately, this didn't seem like any kind of robbery or mugging or anything like that. Neither of the boys, Champion or Shaquille, had anything stolen from them, so it didn't look like that was the motive. It also didn't seem like it was just like a completely random killing, because like I said, the witnesses heard the argument, so it seemed like there was some pre-bad blood maybe between the 2 groups. Maybe they already had a reason to be arguing, and then it just led to this knife attack. Maybe it was a personal issue, maybe it was something that had been ongoing between these 2 groups of boys. So police were now thinking, well, what is it in Champion's personal life that could have potentially led to this? Had he made enemies, or were there people out there that wanted to get rid of him or wanted to hurt him in any way? So police managed to track down one of the last people to speak to Champion on the day of his murder, and that was his friend Junior. But Junior said that everything seemed fine with Champion. It was just a normal day for him. He didn't seem anxious or worried or scared or angry. It didn't seem like he was in the middle of anything. It didn't seem like anything was brewing for him in his life. Champion was just being his normal self. He was talking about his music with Junior. Junior did ask Champion, however, if there was any beef going on at the moment in the scene, because in the underground rap scene in London, there's always little like feuds and little disses here and there. Like there's always some kind of beef. But Champion actually said to Junior, he was like, nah, not for me. I'm not in anything. All I'm focused on is like making music, making money, setting myself up a good career. Just a side note about Junior, by the way, I don't know where else to slip this in, but Junior actually only lived a few streets away from where Champion was murdered, outside that primary school, and he had to walk that street almost every day to get to like work or school or whatever. Junior actually told an MTV documentary crew that for 6 months following Champion's murder, his blood stain was still on the pavement outside of that primary school. There's kids playing in the playground literally just feet away from a murder scene. It's awful. It seems like it can't be real life. So anyway, after this conversation that the police had with Junior, they decided it'd probably be a good idea to look into Champion's rap career and that whole scene, since it seemed like there was always conflicts. Because the rap scene in London goes way beyond just music. There's rivalries, competition. People rap about like real stuff, whether it's personal stuff or beef or like real crimes that they've committed. You know, people are a little bit too honest on tracks sometimes, and so that's when stuff really starts to go sour, when one of your rivals hears that you've said a certain thing in a song. You know what I mean? People take stuff really, really seriously, really, really personally, and they feel the need to fight to defend themselves and their art and their career. And this wouldn't be the first time that violence has stemmed from the music scene in London, this underground rap scene in London. It's actually painfully common. There's so many court cases where like music videos are used as evidence, all these boys waving around knives and stuff, that is then used in a court case against them when they commit a crime because they voluntarily put that on the internet that they are in possession of such weapons. It's like they do it to themselves, they bring it upon themselves, but they feel like they have to because they're caught up in that scene. Everyone's like that in that scene. If you're not showcasing weapons in your video, then it's a crap video. I mean, obviously I don't think that, but that's kind of what the general consensus is in that kind of scene. If it doesn't have all these kind of brutal elements to it and you don't seem really edgy and like dark and mysterious and violent, then you're no one, you know? That's all your reputation. It's just quite a cutthroat industry in general, where you kind of have your people, you have your group, the people that you work with well, but then outside of that, no one is your friend. Everyone is competition, everyone's always butting heads with each other. And Champion himself even rapped in certain freestyles saying things like how he'd back his boys no matter what, it's do or die for his boys. And so police are hearing this and they're thinking, well, what if there's truth in that? What if that is genuinely what has happened? What if he was backing Shaquille so much that it led to this, to a very serious knife attack where he lost his life, all because he was backing his boy? So police asked a bunch of Champion's friends, family, if this could have any truth to it. They were like, is he the kind of guy that would do this, that would go so far to back his best friend that he would lose his life over it? And all of his family were saying, well, no. Everyone always says that kind of stuff in songs, but does anyone really mean it? Probably not. It's just like a rap persona that a lot of people put on. People said, yeah, Champion was very, very loyal, but would he be willing to die over an argument? Probably not. I don't think anyone would, really. People just rapped about, maybe not necessarily violence that they would commit themselves, but they would rap about the violence that they saw in the streets. And Champion saw a lot of violence growing up. He'd never really resorted to any of it himself, though. Champion was a very good guy. He tried to stay out of things like that. He wasn't so easily swept up in that kind of life, but he did like to rap about it in his songs and freestyles because that was just kind of the scene that he lived in. It was a very big cultural thing in that rap scene, I suppose, to rap about the violence on the streets. You rap about carrying your weapons, you rap about backing your boys and fighting people and like pulling a knife and stuff, but it's just kind of what rappers did. They rap about the weapons that they carried, they rap about the feuds that they get into. Some of it's real, but sometimes it's not, and that's the thing. It's kind of hard to decipher what's all just talk and what's actually going on. So the police are now thinking, well, maybe it wasn't Champion that started this, maybe Champion didn't go out and seek violence, but maybe it was someone in that music industry. Maybe someone that saw Champion as a bit of competition. Maybe they heard Champion's songs, heard the things that he rapped about and thought, oh, this guy thinks he's tough, I'm gonna go and give him a run for his money, I'm gonna pull up and fight him. But before police could even get any further in that line of inquiry, they received a phone call from a very anxious teenage boy thinking that he just saw the murderer. This was maybe a day or two after the murderer. This 14-year-old boy was in a KFC in that kind of area of London when some older boys came into the KFC and they were talking very openly, very explicitly about Champion's murder. I don't know exactly what was said. I have some brief quotes and I don't know if these are actually like reworded. I don't know if this is word for word, but they said they jumped out of the taxi and the knife was looking bloody. And this very scared 14-year-old boy was sure that he had just heard the murderers talking about this murder that they'd just committed. And so he very, very bravely got in contact with the police himself to give this information over. And I can't imagine how hard that must have been. For a 14-year-old boy, you know that these older boys are capable of murder, but he still did what was right. And I think that's amazing. Of course, by the time he did tell the police, he didn't ring them then and there in the KFC. That would have been way too dangerous for him. I think he waited until a little bit later. So of course, by the time police found out about this, the older boys were long gone from the KFC. So they weren't able to go down and arrest those exact people. But they did have the KFC CCTV footage to be able to compare to the CCTV footage that they got from the top of the street. They were going to compare things like body language, heights, kind of weight and build, how these men held themselves so that they could say for sure if they were the same people. The KFC CCTV footage still wasn't very good, so it wasn't good enough to be able to do like facial identification, but being able to compare was good enough, I suppose. It was better than what they had at the moment. And when a professional put both CCTV footage things next to each other, they told the police that that is absolutely the same group of 3 boys. So from this point, police used a bunch of different techniques. I don't know exactly what they did. I don't know if they went through like the credit card that was used to buy the meals at KFC or something like that, but they were able to identify these 3 boys. The first one was 16-year-old Amani Lynch. And Amani Lynch was very well known to the police, and he's so young as well. He's 16 years old and he's already well known to the police. He was known for possession of drugs, dealing drugs, different violence charges. He was also in a gang in Forest Gate, so he was a gang member at the age of 16. And this gang that he was in was called Custom House. I think it's one of the biggest gangs in East London. It's pretty notorious and very, very scary. Custom House are known for stabbings, shootings, literally like everything you can imagine. And Amani had been a part of this gang since he was like 12, 13 years old, a 12-year-old boy already in the gang life. It's actually quite heartbreaking to think about because it's almost as if he never even got a fair enough chance to live a normal, law-abiding life. Amani's father wasn't in his life, and I think his mother struggled on so many different levels to raise him. She struggled financially, emotionally, because that is a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility and a lot of energy that is taken from you when you are a single parent. And so I think that is why Amani turned to gang life so young at the age of like 12 or 13 for some belonging. He wanted to feel like he had loads of older brothers. I think he really fit in there because, you know, they all had his back. They were all willing to help raise this kid. Someone that knew Amani Lynch actually told the police a couple of months before this murder took place, so this is before Champion was even murdered. Amani had been saying stuff like, I think something's gonna happen soon. There's not enough for us to do, so people are fighting. I think someone's gonna get hurt. He didn't mention anyone or anything in specific, but it's very clear where his mind was going. There is not enough for the youth of London to do. Everything is too expensive. There's nothing entertaining them or occupying their days, and so that boredom is gonna lead to violence and arguments and fights eventually, because that is the main thing that's going on the streets of London. So it's very clear what kind of mindset Amani was in. He could see this coming. He was so bored that he knew eventually that this gang life was just gonna consume him and he was gonna become violent because he had nothing else to do. So police wasted no time and they went right down to Amani's address in Leighton, which is in northeast London, and they arrested him. One of the first things police did was actually seize his phone because they were still trying to identify those other 2 boys. They were pretty sure that Amani was one of the 3, but there were 2 other potential murderers still out there. So they got his phone, they were looking through like texts and call logs and stuff, and they very quickly found some incriminating text between him and 2 other boys. And immediately police believed that these other 2 boys had to be the other 2 from the CCTV footage. They now had all 3 of them. These other 2 boys were 17-year-old Marvin Simos and 18-year-old Devonte Clifford. But tracking these other 2 boys down was not going to be as easy as it was to track down Amani. They just went straight to Amani's house and there he was, and they arrested him. So they tried to do that for Marvin. They got to his house, he wasn't there. Although it didn't take police long to track him down, and they found that he was actually hiding out at someone's house in East Sussex. So he tried to run away and hide, which certainly tells us something, doesn't it? He was arrested there in East Sussex and he was brought back to the police station in London for questioning. Devonte Clifford, the 3rd boy, was actually the hardest to track down and arrest, and they didn't actually manage to do it for 3 years because he had actually gone out of the country entirely. He'd gone to St. Lucia in the Caribbean. So they knew it was going to be a big task to essentially extradite him and get him back to the UK. That was going to be huge, huge, huge. So in the meantime, they actually just focused on the other 2 boys, Amani and Marvin. By this point in the case, I think it had been about 5 or 6 days since the actual attack took place. This all happened very quickly. And Shaquille, the boy that was also attacked and severely injured, he was almost fully recovered at this point. He was still in hospital, but he had all his stitches, he was good. So police decided to try and utilise him in the investigation. They went in, they interviewed him, and Shaquille was quite, I don't know how to word this, he wasn't giving them much information at all. He said that he didn't see who attacked him, he didn't see anything, he didn't know anything, he couldn't tell police anything. But police weren't believing him. They didn't believe that he hadn't seen the attacker. I mean, there'd been an argument going on for 10 minutes before it. Of course he'd seen who had done this. But it seemed that Shaquille wasn't handing over that information to the police for a reason. Maybe he was too scared to say anything to police in case they came back for him. It seemed like he had only just gotten away with his life. There was always the chance that he could make them angry and they could come back for him. So police decided to just try with him anyway. They told him all 3 suspect names and they just said, do you recognise those names? Do they mean anything to you? Shaquille said he did recognise those names, but he couldn't quite pinpoint where he knew them from. Probably just like the streets and that kind of scene, those circles, you would hear people's names. He said he went to school with Amani Lynch, but other than that, he didn't really know the boys. So police decided to put all 3 of the suspects in a lineup with a bunch of other men, and they brought Shaquille in to have a look at this lineup. He looked at the whole thing and he turned to police and said, I don't know any of these. I don't know any of these men. He didn't pick anyone out of the lineup, even though it was 2 of the boys, because Devonte was obviously still in St. Lucia, but Marvin and Amani were in this lineup. He'd been to school with Amani. How did he not recognise him in the lineup? Again, police found it very hard to believe that he didn't recognise his attacker in this lineup. There was definitely something going on here. Like, Shaquille was definitely holding back. And without this evidence of a lineup, like if Shaquille would have said, yes, it was Amani, yes, it was Marvin, they'd be able to like properly charge those boys. But because Shaquille hadn't said anything, they didn't have any solid evidence against Amani and Marvin, so they had to just let them go. So the 2 of them were released on bail, even though police knew that they were looking in the right direction. They were pretty sure that it was these 2 boys. They just needed Shaquille to confirm this, and he wasn't confirming it. Police begged and pleaded with Shaquille to just cooperate, you know, just help them put these guys down, because right now they're back out on the street ready to commit some more violence, some more life-threatening knife crimes. But Shaquille honestly was just maintaining the story that he didn't see who did it, he didn't know who did it, he didn't recognise any of those men. He was just saying the same thing. And police understood, you know, it's such a shame that people feel they can't give over this information, but if they feel like their life is in danger, especially being seen as a snitch in those kind of scenes can be so dangerous. Being seen as a snitch can make you lose your life. In some circles, you can get killed for being a snitch. so it is understandable that he wouldn't give over this information, but it is such a shame. Even if you're not killed for being a snitch, your reputation is completely ruined. You'll be shunned out of certain circles. No one wants to hang around with a snitch. I mean, in this day and age, in 2021, police have started putting certain things in place that mean that people can give over that kind of information and it won't be a danger to them. But at the time in 2013, I doubt any of these things would have been in place, so I bet Shaquille felt very unable to say those kind of things because he felt it would come back around for him in the streets. People understood, but at the same time, his best friend was murdered standing next to him, and people were just a little bit disappointed that Shaquille couldn't help to solve his best friend's murder. He was being quite uncooperative. Peggy, Champion's mother, said that she wasn't actually surprised that Shaquille was uncooperative in this investigation. She said she'd never really liked him the whole time that he and Champion had been friends. It wasn't anything big that he'd done. She didn't really know why she didn't like Shaquille. She couldn't pinpoint the reason, but there'd always been something off about the boy. She said he was always a polite, nice boy, so she couldn't really understand why she felt that way about him, but it was definitely some level of mother's intuition because now she was seeing that side to him. She always just felt like he wasn't fully there for Champion. And now that he had literally been murdered and Shaquille knew who did it, he wasn't giving that information over to the police. She always just felt like Shaquille was bad news. There was just always something. I mean, a couple of years into his and Champion's friendship, there was an incident that made his mother see this side of Shaquille. And this incident, well, it turned out that Champion's murder wasn't the first time he'd been a victim of knife crime. A year before his murder, when Champion was 16 years old, he'd been out with his friend Shaquille. There were a bunch of other people there. I don't know the exact circumstances of this event because none of them, not Shaquille, not Champion, not any of the other people there, have ever told anyone what fully happened that day. But at some point, another group of boys came over to them, an altercation broke out, and a knife was pulled. This ended with Champion Ganda being stabbed in the leg. Just once. It wasn't that severe of a stab wound, but it was still a stab wound. He'd still been stabbed at 16 years old on the streets of London. He was rushed to hospital, it was stitched up, he was fine. It wouldn't cause any long-term or life-threatening issues for him. Champion's mum was informed of this by Champion's girlfriend's mother, but nobody ever told her why her son was stabbed. Not even Champion. Champion never told his mum why or how that happened, which must have been so scary for a mother to know that your son is out on the streets in those kind of scenes and you don't even know what's going on. But following this incident, when Champion was stabbed, after he recovered, he acted very much how Shaquille was acting now. Champion didn't go to the police. He didn't give in any names or anything. He didn't snitch on anyone. He just recovered and moved on and completely forgot about it, never really talked about it again. That was just how people went about things in that scene. So maybe that tells us a little bit more about why Shaquille was doing that. Maybe he felt like that was what Champion would have wanted or what Champion would have done in that situation, who knows. So anyway, police hear this, about this incident that happened a year before when Champion was stabbed in the leg, and they think, oh well, maybe these are connected. Maybe it's the same boys that have come back a second time and finally murdered him. Maybe it was like an ongoing feud between Shaquille and Champion and this other group of boys. So police looked into it further, but this theory didn't hold up very long. It turned out that the group of people that had stabbed Champion in the leg when he was 16, that was a group of white guys, whereas every piece of information relating to Champion's murder said that the suspects were black. There were all the neighbours that witnessed Shaquille and Champion arguing with a group of 3 black boys. There was the CCTV footage as well, of course, that showed that these 3 boys weren't white. So that theory that these 2 events were linked was very quickly ruled out, although it is very scary to see how much violence was just always in Champion's life. And the scariest part is that Champion didn't seek it out. He was not a violent type. I think it just followed him, just due to the circles that he was in and due to the friends that he had. There was talk of potential gang activity being the cause of Champion's murder. Maybe not Champion himself being in a gang, no one thinks that, but maybe a certain gang didn't like him for some reason, or maybe he was friends with someone in a gang and then it was their beef and Champion just got swept up in it or something like that. And this theory was very quickly confirmed when police received intelligence that Champion's best friend Shaquille was actually in a gang. Shaquille was a gang member. And this opened up the very probable motive now that maybe Champion wasn't the target that day. Maybe Shaquille was the main target for this attack. Maybe they'd gotten out of that taxi, these three suspects had gotten out of the taxi to go and fight Shaquille. That would explain why when the boys walked away it was Shaquille that walked back over to the argument, because it was his argument to be having, and then Champion only followed to back his friend. Maybe those people had wanted to stab Shaquille and maybe Champion was just there in the wrong place at the wrong time and they attacked him too. The gang that Shaquille was in was called the Blood City Gang, and Champion's girlfriend Danielle maintains that Champion was never in a gang. He never even crossed into that part of Shaquille's life. That was separate in Shaquille's life. Champion had his life and they would kind of meet in the middle. Champion would never go and meet Shaquille when he was with his gang or when he was doing anything like that. Danielle says that Champion was literally just living his life. He was just out to have fun. He was never causing issues for anyone. He was just a nice guy. There was a theory when this whole gang motive was brought up that maybe Champion and Shaquille, on the day of Champion's murder, maybe they'd walked into a gang's territory by accident without realising, and then they were in the grasps of that gang. That gang came and attacked them. Because a lot of gang activity in London is determined by postcodes. They have postcode rivalries, so particular areas, people from particular areas don't like other people coming into their area because it's their territory. It's quite a scary concept that you could just walk into the wrong part of London and then you could be attacked for being in someone else's territory. So there was this theory suggested that maybe this area by the primary school that they walked into was maybe Amani Lynch's gang, Custom House. Maybe that was their area. And maybe Shaquille's gang was an opposition to Custom House. Maybe Blood City and Custom House didn't like each other, and then as soon as Amani saw Shaquille of Blood City gang in his area, that was when this attack happened. So police investigated this theory further, but it was very quickly realised that Amani Lynch's Custom House gang actually operated a lot further south than where the murder took place, so it was unlikely that Shaquille and Champion just wandered accidentally into the wrong place. That didn't happen. But that didn't rule out the gang theory entirely. I mean, maybe Amani Lynch of Custom House gang went out and found Shaquille. He didn't have to just wait for Shaquille to wander into his territory. So police decided to see if there might have been any previous beef between Custom House and Blood City gang, or even more specifically, Shaquille and Amani. And that was when they hit the jackpot in terms of evidence and theories and material for this investigation. Just 3 days before the murder, so the murder took place on May 9th, but on May 6th, 2013, Shaquille had been arrested for stabbing a member of the Custom House gang. Shaquille had been arrested for a stabbing. So this proved that both of these gangs, Blood City and Custom House, were at war. They were each other's rivals. It was getting physical and violent. Knives were now introduced. So it seems that Champion's murder and the attack on Shaquille at the same time were just the next steps in this rivalry. Maybe Custom House were trying to get some revenge on the Blood City gang, aka Shaquille of Blood City, for what he'd done to a member of their gang. Police found that these two gangs had been at war for years now, and of course Shaquille and Amani went to school together. And while they'd never physically fought each other, I don't think, there'd always been some kind of conflict. You know, they'd never fully gotten on, Shaquille and Amani, in school. At the time that Shaquille stabbed this Custom House gang member, police did start looking into it, but they really didn't get much chance to look into it until this happened 3 days later. By the time they'd gathered all the information to go and arrest Shaquille for this stabbing, he was in hospital himself for being stabbed. But it turned out that the person that Shaquille had stabbed from the Custom House gang was actually a very close friend of the three suspects, Amani, Devontae, and Marvin. The stabbing victim himself didn't want to press charges against Shaquille. Obviously, this kind of no snitching culture. Gangs very much like to deal with things on their own terms. They don't want to go through the police. They would much rather get physical revenge on the person that has wronged them. And so maybe that's what's happened here. Maybe Amani, Devontae, and Marvin were trying to get revenge for their friend from their gang, so they went out after Shaquille. That is the strongest theory they have for a motive here, and it just seemed as though Champion Ganda was just with his friend, and he was loyal to his friend, and he was willing to fight with his friend. Little did he know that it was going to be that lost him his life. So police spoke with the suspect a little bit further. I mean, they only had Amani and Marvin still at this point in time, but through these questionings and through all the witness statements, police were able to pull together a bit of a theorized version of events. So I'm going to run you through that now. This is what they believed happened on the day, but I do just want to prepare you. They do have very limited information, obviously, with the no snitching culture. They don't have details. So this is as good as it gets. Normally we get quite a detailed theorized version of events, but here it's very basic. So it turned out that Marvin Simos was actually on his way to the Forest Gate police station that day. I think because he'd committed a crime a couple of weeks prior, he was going down to do some paperwork or something, appeal or apply for something. But he didn't want to go alone. He decided to bring his two best friends, Amani Lynch and Devontae Clifford. So that is what put all three of those boys in the taxi on the way to Forest Gate police station on the day that Champion's murder took place. So they were in this taxi going down the road, and it's believed that one of these boys turned and looked out of the window when they saw Shaquille and Champion walking down this road down by Sandringham Primary. And as soon as the men spotted Shaquille, they recognised him as the guy that had just stabbed their friend, their gang member friend, and so immediately they decided, stop this taxi, let's get out, we're going to go and confront that guy. So they stopped the taxi, they jumped out, they all ran down this road after Champion and Shaquille. They're shouting, screaming, this argument takes place, and it very, very quickly snowballs out of control. One of the suspects produced a knife. I believe that one was Amani Lynch. I can't say for sure because I don't actually know, but I believe it was Amani Lynch that had the knife. There are a few other reports that say one of them had a hammer, although I don't know how true that is, so take that with a pinch of salt. And also a couple of sources said that the third boy took his belt off from his jeans and wrapped it around his hand to use it kind of when he punched someone that had inflicted a lot more damage. Again, I don't know how true that bit is. All we know for sure is that they definitely had a knife. And immediately a physical fight ensued, and that very quickly turned into one of the boys pulling the knife on Shaquille and Champion. It was a very, very one-sided fight. The three suspects remained almost completely unharmed, and they ended up running away from the scene, fleeing the scene, leaving Champion bleeding to death and Shaquille in almost critical condition on the street outside a primary school. All in all, this fight must have lasted maybe about 10 minutes from the moment they got out of the taxi to the point where they were running away from the murder scene. It all happened so fast. I can't imagine what must have been going through Champion's head that he got swept up in all of this, and within a couple of minutes he is now realising that he is not gonna get out of here alive. So police charged Amani Lynch and Marvin Simos with the murder of Champion Ganda. However, Devontae Clifford was still in St. Lucia. They knew they needed to get him because now they were pretty sure that he was part of this. They wanted to charge him with Champion's murder, and they knew he was a very dangerous person. He was capable of such violence, and he was just over there in the Caribbean. Bear in mind, this is just a week into the investigation, and I said they didn't get Devontae Clifford back from the Caribbean for 3 years. Police tried absolutely everything they could. They were talking to the St. Lucian government. everything. They were saying, this guy is so dangerous, send him back. We are literally going to charge him with a murder. But for some reason, the government were being like weird about it. They didn't want to send him over. Eventually in 2016, so 3 years after the murder, the St. Lucian government were like, fine, fine, you can have him. So they put him on a plane, sent him to Gatwick Airport, and the UK police intercepted him as soon as he landed on that plane. They arrested Devontae Clifford, and now they had all 3 men that they could finally charge and get to a trial to get them some kind of sentence. So they did question Devontae as soon as they got him back in the UK, because obviously they needed to hear his side of things, and he actually said, well, he kind of maintained his innocence as best as he could. He said that he was there that day, he was at the scene of the murder, but he said that he did nothing. He said that he himself never used a weapon. The only person that used a weapon was Amani Lynch with the knife. He said that his only part in that whole fight was when he grabbed Champion and held him in a headlock, and that was when Amani approached and began stabbing him. Whether those details are true or not, we don't know, but at least Devontae is admitting that he was there at the murder scene, and that gave police the grounds to charge him and send him on his trial. When that trial eventually rolled round, Amani Lynch made headlines for being exceptionally disrespectful in the trial. So I think what happened was Devontae Clifford and Marvin Simos were given some kind of plea deal. They were actually acquitted of their part in the murder, which I have a lot to say about. It's very frustrating, very, very frustrating that they stood there and watched their friend stab someone 11 times. Devontae Clifford literally held Champion Ganda while his friend stabbed him. If Devontae wasn't there holding Champion, he possibly wouldn't have died. So I think it's not very fair that these boys were acquitted and just let free, but that was for a reason, and that was because Devontae and Marvin actually helped to give evidence against Amani Lynch, who was the one that actually held the knife and actually stabbed Shaquille and Champion. So I suppose it is disappointing, but maybe without them being acquitted, maybe they wouldn't have been able to get Amani Lynch down. So I have faith that everything was done in the best way that police and the courts could have done it. So anyway, in the actual trial, it was actually only Amani Lynch and all of his associates that were in the dock. He actually invited all his friends up because he didn't want to be there by himself. Don't know how that's allowed, but it was for some reason. And apparently they were all just like laughing, joking. They were literally just acting as though they were on a day out, like school trip to the court. They didn't care. Like, Champion's family were all there in the court. They were crying. They had to relive everything that had happened to their loved one. And Amani Lynch was just laughing. He was just joking. As if he hadn't just taken the life of such a promising, wonderful young boy. And Amani was actually being really confrontational and just rude in the court. Like, he was shouting over to the jurors. He was being really threatening. He was saying that he was going to find out where they live and he was going to send people on them. Like, in the court, in your murder trial, you're telling people that you're going to find out where they live and send people on them. That's the last thing you should do when you're being tried for murder, I think. Champion's younger sister Jennifer described it as, it was like evil was in the room, which I think was a really powerful quote, which probably sums up Amani's actions very well. I have another quote from Champion's mother Peggy as well. She said, "I see the boy laughing and joking and looking up towards his family members in the public gallery. He acts like he is special and enjoying life, which is something my family are not able to do since the loss of Champion." The trial was 14 weeks long in total, so a very long one, and it was just such a dragged out, traumatic ordeal for Champion's family, and all of that only for it to end on a very disappointing note as well. Like I said, Devontae Clifford and Marvin Simos were both acquitted of the murder, of every charge on them, which I don't think should have happened. I think they should have got something. I understand that deal where you give evidence against this person and we'll give you some kind of deal or a lesser sentence, but that's what it should have been, a lesser sentence, not complete acquittal. But Amani Lynch himself, who was the one that was looking like he was going to get a good sentence, even he didn't. He was actually cleared of his murder charge, and instead he was given a manslaughter verdict instead. And Champion's family were obviously so upset and disappointed with this. The boy that had killed their loved one, their son, was not even being done as a murderer anymore. How is that manslaughter? How is that not murder? How can you stab someone 11 times and expect them to survive it? because that's what they're saying Amani did. If you're stabbing someone 11 times, it is very clear that your intention is to kill them. You can't stab someone 11 times and expect them to recover. For this manslaughter verdict, Amani Lynch was given 14 years in prison. That started in 2017. But he'll actually be eligible for parole just 7 years into that 14-year sentence. So halfway through the sentence, he could get out in 2024, which I just think is insane. If he does get let out after 7 years in prison for murdering a 17-year-old boy with such a promising future, I think it's just heartbreaking. I don't think that's justice, personally. Amani Lynch is still in prison now, and he somehow got access to a phone, and he keeps an Instagram account, and he's always posting stories where he's like dancing and I don't know what the account is, I don't know what the name is. I'm not even gonna try and look because I'm gonna stay as far away from that as I can. If you want to see some small clips of his Instagram account, there are some in the MTV True Life Crime documentary on this case. Like right at the end of the documentary, they've put in like a couple of clips of them going through his like Instagram highlights. Oh my god, he has an Instagram highlight that's titled just the shh emoji, and he just posts loads of stuff from his time in prison. Like there's one clip of him dancing and he's captioned it, "This is the dance I done when I beat the case." He is bragging about getting away with murder. All of that is very frustrating, very upsetting, very disappointing, but I do have a slightly nicer note to end this case on, and that is that Champion's younger brother has actually followed in his brother's footsteps to become a musician, a rapper. And he's actually very successful. His name is Burner. You might have heard of him. He's quite like, quite popular. He gets like millions of streams in like the London rap scene. Some of his most popular songs include Council State of Mind, Bait. He has that song Bait. And Burner has been quoted saying, "It's been tough since Champion's death, but putting my thoughts all down on paper and being able to rap about it makes it easier. I just want to finish what Champion started." And I don't know if he is still in 2021, but at one point Burner was managed by one of Champion's school friends, a girl called Sasha, that was Champion's friend in school, was now working with his brother. They were doing it together to try and achieve Champion's dreams, but for Burner, you know? I just thought that was nice that they could get together and work on this thing after such tragedy, that they can like connect and keep Champion's memory alive like that. Champion's mother has also since set up a charity in her son's memory. It's called All Champion, and it fights to end knife crime. They offer help to victims of knife crime to help them kind of get back up on their feet, because it can really affect people. Obviously, other than the physical, like if they do survive and they get treated and they're back in fighting physical condition, that will affect someone's mental forever. They won't feel safe on the streets ever again. They'll have trust issues, you know, and this charity really helps to help people that have been affected by knife crime, even the perpetrators as well. They rehabilitate perpetrators, you know, people that get swept up in gang life at a very young age and then they can't find a way out of it and they're committing these knife crimes, though they don't really want to, but they just kind of feel stuck in that. And another lovely thing that the All Champion charity is doing that's kind of separate from the knife crime stuff, it was one of Champion's dreams when he was alive to build an orphanage in Congo, and of course he never got a chance to do it, and so they are currently raising money to build an orphanage. There's a GoFundMe for it. I'll leave it linked down below. If you do have anything to give, no matter how small, I'm sure it would be very much appreciated. They've only raised about 1,000 of the 30,000 goal right now, so honestly, anything and everything that you can donate, I'll leave it linked in the description. It was something that Champion was so passionate about. He knew he always wanted to do that, and so his family are building that as his legacy. Like, that is going to be Champion forever, you know, making such a difference, and I think that's lovely. Yeah, like I said, there'll be a link down below in the description for that GoFundMe, and also to the charity All Champion. You can just donate to that charity to help them campaign against knife crime. But that is all I have for this case. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, if you do have any cases that are kind of similar to this one related to knife crime, especially knife crime in London, please leave them down below in the comments. I'll look through as many as I can. I really want to try and do more like this on my channel. I felt so connected to this case as I was researching it, and I feel like there's something there. I feel like I want to fight for this a little bit more. It's something that I haven't really looked into, and I feel quite bad about that, but I suppose better late than never, and now I'm here to kind of spread education and resources on this horrible knife crime epidemic that's going on in London. It's so sad, it's so scary. I mean, it's sad for the victims and also for the perpetrators that get swept up in this life even when they don't want to be in it. I mean, there's differing levels of sympathy, but also, you know, some people have no choice. And I feel like this just should be talked about way more. So that's what we're gonna do on the Eleanor Neale channel. Let's do some more cases like this. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Remember, they're giving you guys a special limited time offer of 30% off of an annual subscription, making it just $3.50 a month, plus a 2-week free trial to kick that off. So if you wanna make the most of that offer, go through the link down below in the description. Go get your discount. Huge thank you to all of my channel members for helping me decide the cases that I cover, especially my tier 2 members whose names are all on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can just click the join button on a desktop, or there'll be a link in the description of this video. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you want to leave a thumbs up, that would really help me out. I would really love to see all your beautiful thumbs on the video. If you want to subscribe to my channel, there'll be a link to do so right here. I make true crime content like this every single week. If you want to subscribe to my second channel that's a little bit more light-hearted, a little bit more crackhead vibes, then you can click on that one. But if you want to watch another true crime video, I'll leave you a playlist on screen right now. These are a bunch of my favourite videos that I've covered. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!